Welcome back, Sparklers, to another episode of Ignite Your Spark with me, your host, Kim Duff Selby. Now, today I have a repeat visitor. That's right, Dr. Greg Hammer was on the show or the podcast about a year ago exactly to talk about his book, Gain, the Gain Method, the happiness, wait, it's Gain Without Pain, the Happiness Handbook for healthcare professionals. But we talked all about that. Anyway, let me tell you about Dr. Hammer because some of you will be new. He is a professor at Stanford University School of Medicine, a pediatric intensive care physician, a pediatric anesthesiologist, a mindfulness expert, and the author of the book I just mentioned. And he's different than your usual doctor because he really believes in working with your mind as well as your body. And we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about one of the very important concepts in his book. So thank you, Dr. Hammer. Thanks for joining us again.
Kim, it's great to be back with you. I feel
Yay.
energized just listening to you speak.
Well, thank you. Dr. Hammer and I live very close to one another, and we are very fortunate to have the most glorious weather here in Northern California, which does a lot for your mind, doesn't it? I mean, when you can get out in the beautiful weather, boy, mental health gets a boost.
Absolutely. I think a lot of us are very sensitive to the things that our senses take in, but I think the brilliance of the light here and just the usually perfect temperature and all of the beautiful plants and the scents, everything. Yeah, I love living here. I grew up outside of Chicago and I still pinch myself every day.
Yeah, we are so fortunate. We are so fortunate. And there are others who live in other parts of the country or the world that really have to dig deep inside of themselves to ignite their sparks, as I like to say, on a day when it is gloomy and you aren't feeling so great. We are fortunate that we have the exterior, we have the elements to bring us joy. And today, not that we're going to focus on that, but there are so many ways that we can tap inside and help ourselves feel lighter and better and ignite sparks, because my goal is to help people see that they are a light, they have a light, and they can really share that light. And we are all part of the same human tribe. And one of the, I would say, the biggest obstacles to overcome is being judgmental. And you are, I'm going to say, an expert in how to be non-judgmental and why we need to be that way. So let's go into judgment. It's a big deal. We are always judging others. And why is that? I mean, that's human nature, but why do you think we do that? To make ourselves feel better? I don't know.
Well, I think that is a reason that we do it, in part. We're wired to constantly assess and analyze everything in our environment. We talked about how we're so affected by things detected by all of our senses, our visual perception, our tactile perception, what we hear, what we taste. And so we are wired to be always analyzing and evaluating everything around us with all of those senses. And we are wired to sort of categorize things, to put things in their little boxes. And I can imagine why this was of benefit from an evolutionary standpoint. Let's go back 50,000 years or so to early Homo sapiens. Everything around them might have been hiding a threat, for example. And so there they are sitting in their cave with the fire to keep their family warm, and they had to be wary at all times. Perhaps there was a saber-toothed tiger lurking just outside the mouth of their cave.
Yeah.
And even when they were out and around foraging or hunting, they had to constantly be wary and analyzing everything around them for possible threats, let's say. And I think, our brains are wired for elements that interfere with our ability to be happy. I think we talked about this a little bit last time. One of them is that we have a negativity bias, and maybe it came from this wariness, this constant vigilance and sort of worst case scenario perspective that our forebears had because they lived in such a hazardous environment. And we no longer do, for the most part. Obviously, there are exceptions to that, but we have retained this hardwiring of our brain, and we tend to look at everything around us, analyze it, categorize it, and then we take it to the next step, which is rendering a judgment about it. And that's the part that is really not necessary. And we can talk about whether or not that judgment helps us or hurts us.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it could do both, depending on the circumstance and the situation, or it could do either at the time. But when I think of being judgmental, I think of the negative connotation of it. And yes, we did talk about that negativity bias, and that is just so crazy how I don't know, evident that is. I just want to get rid of that negativity bias. So, and part of getting rid of that is getting rid of our ability, or not ability, but the problem we have with judging. And to me, when you hear, oh, that person's so judgmental, I mean, they're not saying it in a good way.
No, generally, we're referring to that negativity that you just mentioned. And we do tend to superimpose that negativity on things that we evaluate. I think it's really important, Kim, to differentiate between discerning and judging before we go further. Discerning is important. So, for example, we all meet people that we feel drawn to. So I have a feeling that you and I both are drawn to people who are very positive and have really positive energy. And so we need to evaluate others to discern whether this is somebody that I feel drawn toward. Is this somebody who's going to be a healthy companion for me? And I have to discern, do I want to have a cup of coffee with Kim? Or do I want to have that cup of coffee with somebody else who may be kind of negative and very judgmental, and we're just going to end up talking about other people and in a negative way? And so I would use my power of discernment to say, no, I think I'm going to have that cup of coffee with Kim. And
good answer. Good answer.
That's discerning. That doesn't mean that I have to judge the other person in a negative manner. I can simply see the other person for who they are, and without labeling them good or bad, I may decide that I prefer to spend my time with somebody else. And that's okay. So discerning does not have to involve judging. Unfortunately, the way our brains seem to be wired, it often does. And when we judge things, we are not seeing them as they truly are. So let's think of judgment as casting a bit of a veil or a hue over the apparent object of our judgment. So if I say, well, I'm driving in my car and somebody's driving in the lane to the right of me and they pull in front of me and change into my lane and they don't use their turn signal, immediately I start to form all these judgments. Okay. Or I am a doctor and I'm going to see a patient in the intensive care unit, and the patient is a child on a ventilator, and I smell cigarette smoke on the mother's sweater. I immediately start to form judgments about who this person is. Well, I'm not really seeing that guy driving the car for who they are. And I'm not seeing that woman whose child is on a ventilator for who she is either. So if I want to see things clearly, in my case, I did my gain practice in the morning. I focus on my gratitude, acceptance, intention, and non-judgment. And then when I start to judge during the day, a little light bulb goes off, and I'm recognizing that I'm judging these people. And when I start to do that and that light bulb goes off, I have a bit of a laugh to myself and say, Greg, you're judging that person. For all I know, that guy who changed lanes in front of me has a pregnant wife in the back of the car, or the mother of the child quit smoking 20 years ago and she took a puff of someone else's cigarette because she's so overwhelmed. Or maybe she wasn't even smoking. Maybe she was just standing next to somebody who was smoking outside.
Right. Right.
So we don't really know. We make these assumptions and we end up evaluating through a colored
Lens.
lens, exactly. And,
You
and
know,
unfortunately, because of our negativity bias, the color of that lens often casts a negative hue on that which we observe.
yes, as you were speaking, I thought we just need to reframe, as is so important in many areas of life, instead of saying, I have to go visit so and so if it's an elderly relative. I get to. So perhaps it's not quite the same thing, but it's changing the lens, like you said, and just thinking, putting ourselves in the other person's position, perhaps, because there are so many scenarios that could be happening and could be causing them to do the various things that they've done. Not always. There are people out there on the roads with road rage. Right. Get that. But it is perhaps being kinder and gentler towards others, more forgiving towards others until we know what the actual reason for something is. It all comes down to us and our perception and the way we react to something, doesn't it?
It does. And I'll actually take it one step further, Kim, and I'll say that even if it is road rage, even if we take it to that next step and say, well, this is a bad way to behave, we still can drop the judgment and we benefit from that.
Yes.
And it reminds me of a wonderful teacher of Advaita with whom I have sat, named Francis Lucille, who said, perhaps we can look at the world with benevolent indifference. And to me, that means we're going to not be indifferent as though we don't care. We're simply not going to judge. We're going to have a slightly positive way of looking at the world without judging it. And to me, that is compatible with happiness. That's why the end in gain is non-judgment. And those are the four components of, I think, the elements of happiness: gratitude, acceptance, intention, and non-judgment. And I think the non-judgment part of it is within our grasp, just as the others are. You talked about the weather. Well, I grew up in a place where the weather wasn't great. Nevertheless, we can be grateful that we're not in Florida right now with 100-mile-an-hour winds and several feet of storm surge and having our homes decimated. I mean, maybe it's hot and humid, or maybe it's extremely cold, as it was often one or the other where I grew up. But I'm grateful that I live in a safe place and that, in fact, the weather is not destroying my home or myself or people I care about. So we can always be grateful. We can accept that which causes us pain. We can be purposeful in the way we live. And therefore, we can actually rewire our brains if we do so with intention. And when we get to non-judgment, there are exercises we can do that actually can help us drop the judgments. And by
Okay.
virtue of those practices, we will be less judgmental and happier.
Yes. And before you tell us a little bit about those exercises and how you have envisioned them and had them actually spark and grow from what you had originally written, also, I think that everybody should take a moment and think about how they feel when they judge someone, because you don't feel good. You get that. I can think about it like if I'm judging someone, say I'm driving and I'm judging someone because they're speeding, right? And I'm like, oh, that jerk, I can't. It doesn't make you feel good. Do you want to not feel good? No. You feel better when you are grateful, when you are in gratitude, when you are thinking positively about someone. I mean, I think that's part of our stress, and that's part of what, creates disease, is that constant and it just, we need to switch. We need to switch over so that we don't feel that negativity. I mean, I think if everybody thinks of one moment when they were judgmental, you go, oh yeah, icky feeling. And then when you switch and you think of when you gave someone a compliment and they were shocked by it, you're in a Starbucks and you say to the person, oh my gosh, I love your nails. And they're like, whoa, thank you. Think how that makes you feel, right?
Right.
I mean, we want to all feel great.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I tell a story in the book about I'm riding my bicycle to work. I'm going through this narrow lane that I passed through on my way there and back. It's beautiful. There's light filtering through the treetops. There's a cool breeze. There's the scent of these wonderful trees. And as I'm riding on the path, I see that there's a person walking ahead of me in the same direction that I'm riding. And as I get closer, I see he's got buds in his ears and that he's looking at his screen. And I start to form judgments. Well, this guy's like, he's out of touch. He's looking at his screen. What's on his screen? It's so beautiful where we are walking and riding. Why look at your screen? And then he's walking in the middle of the path. He's in my way and he's inconsiderate. And then I remember that I did my gain meditation and a light bulb goes off that I'm being judgmental and I get a laugh out of it. And I say, Greg, how silly. And as I ride past him, I look at him and smile. And he looks at me and smiles. And lo and behold, it's a little hit of dopamine instead of a negative interaction that leaves me and possibly him feeling rather, unpleasant.
Yeah.
So, yes, this is within our power to reshape, rewire the way we think. Our brains have this wonderful property called neuroplasticity. If we practice new ways of thinking, little by little, with a daily practice, our brains will start to change for the better. And we have that capability.
Yeah. I would love for you to share with us how, at least one way, how can we learn to be more non-judgmental?
Sure. Well, in the gain meditation, we sit, we find a comfortable place to sit after we've done our morning hygiene. We relax our body, we get in touch with our breath, we slow it down. This slows down our heart rate and our blood pressure. And we go through a contemplation of that for which we're grateful. Something painful, perhaps, that we benefit from accepting. And so we contemplate our acceptance, bringing that painful thing into our hearts, embracing it. Then we acknowledge our intention, and maybe we spend 5 seconds just totally experiencing what's happening around us and maybe inside us right now for 5 seconds even. And then we remind ourselves of our intention to rewire our brains to let go of this negativity bias and focus on the present. And we get to the end in non-judgment. And here, one thing that I describe is while we're in touch with our deep, slow breathing, picture the Earth itself, apparently suspended in space, one of these beautiful NASA images that we've all seen, this beautiful blue planet, maybe with some cloud layers around it. And we recognize during this stage of our gain meditation that the Earth is neither good nor bad. There are a lot of things going on the surface. We don't have to judge even those, but look at this planet and let's look at it with benevolent indifference. We acknowledge its beauty, but we don't judge it. The Earth is simply neither good nor bad. It is exactly what it is. And therefore, it's only logical for me to think the same about myself. I am simply the person that I am. I am neither good nor bad. And we can repeat to ourselves, I am simply the person that I am. And maybe shorten this to I am. And connect the I am with some slow, deep breaths, and we conclude our brief morning gain practice and slowly open our eyes, and we're ready to go out in the world with this sort of new non-judgmental point of view.
That's beautiful. I was picturing it, as you were speaking it, I was picturing the earth and I was picturing then myself. And I realized that so many times we are even harsher on ourselves, harsher judging ourselves. Oh, my wrinkles. Oh, my this. Oh, my that. I'm not good enough. And that's judging, isn't it?
Oh, yes. There are a lot of scientifically derived data to demonstrate that we judge ourselves much more harshly than we would judge a friend, even. And so
Yeah.
there's a cognitive behavioral exercise, actually, when we're judging ourselves harshly, to imagine that we're talking to a good friend who is judging themselves the way we're judging ourselves. And imagine what we would say to them or how we would respond to them. I would say, Kim, your wrinkles are just a sign of your maturity and your life experience.
Right.
They're beautiful. You are beautiful. You don't
Right.
look old. And how compassionate and forgiving and non-judgmental we would be toward that other person. And then it only makes sense, just as with the exercise looking at the earth, if we would speak to a good friend that way, it really only makes sense for us to speak to ourselves that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard that also in sort of coaching arena because I have a coaching certification, creativity is you would also, how would you speak to a young child? You wouldn't be harsh to them as we are harsh to ourselves. We are so harsh. It is such a good reminder speaking to you about the GAIN method and about how important it is because even I, who read all the self help and believe all of this, we're human. We fall back into the traps of judging ourselves and judging others. And this is such a good reminder. The GAIN method: gratitude, acceptance. What's the I?
Intention,
Intention
intention, and
and
non-judgment.
non-judgment. I know that one. I
It's
guess we
how
need,
Dr. John Kabat-Zinn defined mindfulness, which I also think can be a definition of happiness. It's awareness of the present moment on purpose, that's the intention, non-judgmentally.
can you say that
Awareness of
again?
the present moment on purpose, non-judgmentally. I find that so resonant.
Yes, absolutely. And it is so challenging. Speaking of being present, I think that to me is one of the most challenging things, being a person with an overactive mind. And that I don't really think I'm like type A, but I am sort of, it's really hard for me sometimes to be present. It's easy when I have someone to focus on, like you, we're having a conversation. I can be present in this conversation. But how often our minds wander? What do you tell people about that? Is there a way that can bring us back to the present?
Well, that's what the GAIN method really is. And as I was saying, we focus on our breath. That actually brings us to the present experience
Breath.
because, at least for a few seconds, it's relatively straightforward to focus on the air passing in through your nose, filling our chest, pausing, and then the beauty in which the breath is just released out to the world without any effort. And we repeat that a few times. And that begins to get us focused on the present experience. When we get to the I in GAIN, I tell people, even if it's for 5 seconds, spend the first 5 seconds while you're contemplating your intention, focusing on the experience you're having, being aware of the current moment. And this can be, I'm listening to, I often get this where I live on Stanford campus, there's an airplane flying by. It's not something I notice except when I'm quiet and I'm focusing on my senses and I'm focusing on what I'm hearing. I actually have a bit of ringing in my ears when it's quiet, so I notice that. But then I can often notice an airplane, the sort of Doppler effect, the frequency of the sound increasing and then decreasing as the airplane flies by. And I am pretty sure sometimes that plane is very far away. But when
Mm,
I'm truly focused on my present experience, I sense things that I normally would never be aware of. And even if I can only manage that for 5 seconds, notice the airplane flying by, notice the tingling on the bottom of my feet, notice the pressure the chair is exerting against my body.
yeah.
Gradually, we can kind of lengthen this experience of the present moment to 10 seconds or 15 seconds and relax into it. And the wonderful thing about that is, Kim, it gives us, it's starting to rewire the way we think. And so when we find that we're so distracted unhappily by what might happen in the future, and we're using our negativity bias to catastrophize and thinking of the worst thing that might happen, a little light bulb might go off and bring you back to the present moment. Say, oh, just let me pause here for a moment and focus on what I'm hearing. Maybe
Yeah.
I can close my eyes briefly. Maybe I'm driving and I'm catastrophizing. Bing, a little light bulb goes off. Let me just focus on the car in front of me.
Yeah.
and have sort of benevolent indifference for the car and the person driving it. Bring
Ooh,
myself back to the breath and the present moment. So again, it's
yeah.
rewiring very, very slowly and gradually with a daily practice, the way we think, and bringing ourselves more into the present moment.
Yeah. It's funny you said that this is coming up today too, because I sit out on my deck in our gorgeous California weather every morning as my meditation sort of prayer begins. And I was thinking this morning, I made myself stop because I didn't hear the birds. That's something that anybody can do anytime. It's so funny you said that. And then I just stopped everything. I mean, just my mind, I went, where are those birds? Where are the birds chirping? And that anytime, anywhere, it's like you with the airplane. It was me with the birds this morning. My thoughts were going, but I wasn't hearing the birds. And then when I stopped to slow down and I heard the birds, I don't know, it just sort of gave me a sense of peace. And I think wherever we are, anytime, whether you're on a walk, you can stop because your mind goes and choose a color and look at that color and go, oh, look, I see that color there and there and there. It's being sort of refocusing almost.
Absolutely. And I think it's very helpful to focus on the breath at first.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we do our gain meditation, it starts with the breath. And periodically during this few minutes we're sitting doing this practice, we return to the breath. And the beauty of that is we begin to associate the breath with gratitude, with acceptance, with intention, with non-judgment. So when we're judging someone harshly or ourselves even more harshly, a light bulb goes off, reminds us that we're doing it. We focus on the breath and then bring ourselves back to that element in the contemplative practice. And the more you do it, the more this positive association begins to occur. And the more you'll get it when you're judging somebody,
Yeah.
adversely in particular. A light bulb goes off and you can bring yourself back to your practice and drop it and get a little laugh out of it. So it's beautiful. It's very simple. It just
Yeah.
takes a little bit of dedication. I think first we have to recognize that we deserve to be happy. It's our true
Yes.
nature. So let's
Yes.
do things that move us in a direction of happiness instead of resisting doing just that.
Yeah. Instead of always thinking the worst or thinking of the worst possible outcome, it's that negativity. We just need to focus on the positive. And you know what? Remember, when we're judging others, they have a spark inside of them too. We all have a spark. Whatever your beliefs are in terms of how we were created, whether it was a big bang, it was God, it was Adam, it was Eve, who knows? But we all sort of share a part of the world and we all have that spark. So remember that also when you're judging someone else or yourself. We got a spark that the world wants to see. So we need to ignite that. And to my mind, igniting that spark using the gain meditation is a great way to start your day to ignite your spark so that you can go out and be happy, healthy, and helpful to the world.
Yeah, I think the first thing is when we realize that we all have this negativity bias, that's sort of a load off our mind because we don't have a secret that nobody else knows about with regard to how we're negative, how we can get the manifestations of that negativity bias may include depression, constant negative judging of others and so on.
Mhm.
We are all like this. Our brains have all evolved to have a negativity bias and to be in a maladaptive way, very distracted by the past and the future and have a difficult time being present. We are all the same. We're all made of the same stuff, both literally and figuratively. We're all in this together. And we're not like some isolated being that's the only one that has this secret. No, we're all the same. We all think the same way. Breathe a sigh of relief, and maybe that'll take a little bit of the self-judgment away and let it dissipate.
Yeah, I think that's a really good reminder also that we're all the same. We are all the same. We're all human beings just trying to do the best we can. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Dr. Greg Hammer, what a pleasure speaking with you again. You have such great insights, and I am even more familiar with the GAIN method now than I was a year ago because I don't always do it in the same way, practice in the same way, but I think about it a lot. I do. Gratitude, acceptance, intention, and non-judgment. So I appreciate your sharing those words again with us today. Before we say so long sayonara, is there anything else you'd like to share?
I think we've covered it. I would just like to say it's always such a great pleasure talking with you, Kim, and seeing your smiling face. And anytime you'd like me to come back and share some more of this, I'm all yours. And thank
Oh,
you. Thank you for the experience.
wonderful. I really appreciate it because I think that you cannot hear enough how important it is to still your mind, body, brain. Let go preconceived notions of other people, let go preconceived notions of how you should be. This is just such a great reminder, really. And I want to tell everybody out there, let go. Do not judge yourself. Treat yourself with kindness. Treat the next person with kindness. We're all in this together. We're all human beings on this planet, and everybody's got a spark. So I urge you to get out there and every day experience gratitude, acceptance, intention, and non judgment. And because of that, you're going to ignite your spark. So shine on, everyone.
Wonderful.